All right, so I'll call to order the meeting of the Downtown Community Task Force for December 16th. Man, first mistake. All right. No, just kidding. 16th, 2021. Leslie, can you please call roll?
Yes, thank you. Member Thompson.
Here.
Member Onderset.
Here.
Member Mayer.
Here.
Member Von Hune.
Here.
Member Vargas Smith.
Here.
Member Reed. Member Reed is currently absent. Member Coyne.
Here.
Member Ty. Member Ty did send us an email letting us know that she would be out of town and asked to be excused this evening. And then Member Varjane has also already been excused for this meeting.
Okay. So is there a motion to excuse or not to excuse Member Ty and Member Reed from this meeting?
So moved.
Seconded.
All in favor to excuse Member Ty and Member Reed, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. The ayes carry. They're both excused.
Thank you.
Let's see, Leslie, can you read into the procedures of the record? And then I do want to, can we have a brief discussion on just setting some time limits for DCTF members as well as public, just to make sure we can kind of expedite and move through?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Meetings are conducted by the chair in accordance with the following procedures. The chair of the DCTF directs all activity during the meeting. Any item on this agenda may be continued to a subsequent meeting. Special procedures, time limits may be applied to any items as prescribed by the chair. Copies of the current agenda and staff reports for each of the items on the agenda are available online on the Downtown Precise Plan website, as well as on the City Clerk's website. So, Chair?
If the rest of the DCTF agrees, I'd like to set a 5-minute timeline for DCTF member comments and a 2-minute timeline for public comments, and that there was only one round for each item. Does anyone want to have a discussion?
You need a motion on that?
Well, I'm asking, I don't want to just.
He doesn't.
If you think it's too tight, or, we want to do anything different. I just think, instead of multiple passes on the same item, I would like to have, consolidate your thoughts and, be as precise as possible so we don't linger on. I know I saw a lot of public people drop off last week at the end, towards the end. I want to make sure we can get through the agenda.
So Adam, does that mean we won't be able to comment on other people's comments, other board members' comments?
Well, so that's why I'm suggesting maybe we do 2 rounds for DCTF members.
Okay, so that would be a round and then comment rather than new information.
Yes. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, no problem. We do too. And I would just ask everybody to regulate themselves, including in the public. I don't want to set a timer. I mean, that's not what the intent is. It's just to try to make sure we're all mindful of everyone's time.
So we'll have our discussion pre-opening up to public comment.
Correct.
We have that, then just like all the other.
Like all the others. And
Yeah.
then, so you'll be able to have 2 sets of discussions. You'll be able to have 2 5-minute sessions before public comment, and then I guess 1 after, right? In case we need to talk about anything after that.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Okay.
Does the rest of the DCTF agree to
Yes.
try to follow those time limits?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, agreed.
Anyone object? Any issues, concerns? Okay, so that's what we'll do. We'll do you'll have the ability to speak 2 times for 5 minutes before we go to public comment, and then 1 time after. And then for the public, if you could please keep your comments down to 2 minutes per item, that would be much appreciated.
And then Adam, as chair, you would have the authority to be able to extend somebody's time if you deem it appropriate?
We can. I mean, all I was going to do is if it goes extensively over, I was going to ask the person to wrap up
Good idea.
their final thought. I'm not trying to 2 minutes and cut anyone off. It's just trying to be a little bit more mindful so we can get through everything in a reasonable hour so everyone can attend and be a part of it.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Adam,
Yes.
so, and I think this was asked, if the public does come up with a comment that includes a question, that's open for the,
Yeah, you would be able to comment. The DCTF will comment. You'll have 1 5-minute rebuttal or answer session after the public comment.
okay.
Sorry, I'm not trying to make this too complicated. I know I saw a lot of people dropping off after about 8:30 last time, so. All right, so we can move, if everyone is okay with it, we can move on and we'll move to the consent calendar, Leslie.
There are no items on the consent calendar this evening.
Awesome. All right, we'll move on to general business. Leslie, can you discuss the first item, please?
Yes, so the first item we have for you this evening is an introduction and discussion on the downtown management entity task that we've added to the scope of work for our precise plan. And tonight we have the consultants here for you to do this presentation. So Jim, am I introducing you first?
Sure.
Okay. So we'll start with Jim from WRT, who will introduce the rest of this team. Go ahead.
Thank you, Leslie. Really nice to be here for this purpose tonight. As I think all of you know, we proposed an additional aspect of the downtown study, which was to look, a little bit more deeply at activation and how we can sort of monitor and manage those strategies over time. And some sort of downtown management entity is the subject of this evening, and I'm very pleased to have our team member David Greensfelder, who you all know from the work he's done on the retail strategy aspects of the downtown plan to date, but also a new team member, Michael Byrne from MJB Consulting, who is a specialist in bids and P-bids and these different kinds of downtown management entities. So this meeting tonight is really a kickoff of their work. They want to go over some of the basics of activation and the different mechanisms for managing that, and then get some feedback from all of you that they can then carry forward to complete their work. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to David and Michael. And David, would you like to go ahead and share, or would you like me to share? I'm good either way. I've got your PowerPoint here at hand.
Since there are two of us presenting, would you mind doing the honors?
Yep, absolutely. So I'm going to do this and this. Okay. Let me know if everybody can see this.
Can you make it wider? It's like really skinny.
Is it still skinny?
Yes.
Oh, it's wide on my screen. So let me see.
It looks like, oh, there we go.
Is that good?
That is
Better.
good.
That's,
Yes.
yeah.
Perfect. Great. Okay, take it away, David.
Well, so if you would maybe flip down 2 slides. Mike and I have worked together on a number of projects, including on a predecessor to this downtown Santa Clara effort, going back probably close to 10 years now. Mike's going to talk to you about downtown entities and how they work. And then I'm going to fill in and talk a little bit about activation of the downtown district. So Mike, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Very good. Thank you, David. And so Jim, I guess you're working the slides, so you can go to the first one. I'm going to apologize in advance. This is going to be a lot of information thrown at you in a relatively short period of time. which is why the slides might seem a little more wordy than I usually make them, so that you have something to take away with you. Because again, to use the jargon of the industry, it's going to be a little bit like drinking from the fire hose. But starting with a couple of definitions, place management, a lot of people ask me, well, what the hell is that? It's basically a way of saying, of describing when a lot of people are working together to make a business district better. If you want to be more formal about it, a coordinated multi-stakeholder approach to enhancing the appeal, vitality, economics of a specific place or district. It's a lot of people working together to make a business district better. And an urban place management organization, I did not make that up. That is an acronym from the International Downtown Association, a very unwieldy one. IDA's never been great at marketing. An urban place management organization, it's basically how this working together, the form that it takes as a sort of nonprofit entity of some sort. And I'm going to get into the different kinds of entities, different sorts of models for these UPMOs. Next slide. So a little bit of history. Obviously, we've always had chambers of commerce, but really urban place management organizations really came of age in the 1970s. And it was a movement that was driven mostly by property and business owners who had come to the recognition that downtown and Main Street districts really require a particular sort of attention beyond what the public sector could, or at least was able in the 70s to provide. Obviously, that was a time where a lot of downtowns were losing their corporate headquarters. They were losing those private sector champions. At the same time, you are seeing contraction of municipal budgets, as well as the emergence of regional mall competition. And all these factors kind of spurred the property and business owners that had remained in downtown to really do something about it, and to not wait for what was at that time a beleaguered public sector to arrest the decline. And that's when you first started seeing, the rise of the UPMO. Next slide. And in the ensuing half century, the industry has seen explosive growth. There's now about 2,500 of these across North America, about 4,000 worldwide. Certainly, they deserve at least some of the credit for how downtowns and main streets have revived over the last few decades. To the extent that there is a trade association for the industry, it's the International Downtown Association. There's also a number of statewide downtown associations. California has one of the larger ones in the country. And so those are kind of the main trade associations. Next slide. And originally, these UPMOs, they were focused on clean and safe, right? They were focused on sanitation and security. Again, remembering that they really kind of emerged from the 70s, a very different time for downtowns. But as they were able to demonstrate success in those initial areas, their work plans started to expand. And so over time, these UPMOs would assume responsibility for marketing and events, for policy advocacy, for public space management, and in later decades, economic development, capital improvements, even parking management. Perhaps the most famous UPMO it might be Manhattan's Bryant Park Corporation. Bryant Park is a park that's about a block away from Times Square and was in a really bad way in the 80s. It was known largely as Needle Park for reasons that you could imagine. Very much through the efforts of the Bryant Park Corporation, it was turned into a jewel, an active and heavily programmed green space managed by the Bryant Park Corporation on behalf of the city, which also happened to greatly increase the value of the surrounding office towers in the process. And so that really was a milestone in the UPMO movement for what these nonprofit entities could do. Next slide. And again, their work plans have expanded significantly. Just a few of the more interesting roles that they are playing these days. Obviously, these sorts of organizations were instrumental in the early months of the pandemic. Cities were scrambling at that time. And UPMOs really stepped up in a business support role. But also, talking more generally, UPMOs routinely are the ones who organize and run special events that put and keep business districts on the map. They develop and operate public markets that can serve as brick and mortar platforms for startup entrepreneurs and small businesses. They've been known to create and manage shipping container villages that can activate dead space. This one on the lower left, that's a long-time surface parking lot across from Public Square in the middle of downtown Cleveland, which was activated with shipping containers, businesses within shipping containers, that is. They often serve as information clearinghouses, providing data that the private sector cannot easily or cost-effectively get on their own. And they also develop and roadshow marketing collateral that can really frame the opportunity and tell the story and make the case for a district to retailers, to brokers, to developers, to investors. These are just some of the things that are part of these expanded work plans that UPMOs have been taking on in more recent decades. Next slide. Okay, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the different models for these UPMOs. The first are what is known as voluntary organizations. And the key attribute of voluntary organizations is that they are not self-sustaining. They are funded by membership dues, government grants, sometimes special events. And so there's always some level of fiscal uncertainty from one year to the next. They may have a paid executive director, even a small staff, but the size of that staff will vary widely. Examples include merchants associations, chamber of commerce, and what I'm going to describe next, a Main Street organization. But as an example of a basic merchant association, you've got the Downtown Campbell Business Association. That's basically a voluntary organization. It's a merchant association. And you know, and you can see that in what it is able to do, the capacity that it does have, and what it's not really able to do as well. Because obviously these sorts of organizations tend to be limited in just how much they can take on. Next slide. So there's a particular type of voluntary organization that I'd like to call attention to. It's called a Main Street. That is, and that's a Main Street with a capital M, capital S. It's grounded in what's known as the Main Street approach, which was first developed by the National Trust for Historic Preservation in the 1980s. And it's organized around these 4 points: economic vitality, design, promotion, organization. Those 4 points might seem quite intuitive today. They weren't back then. And so this was quite a moment in the history of UPMOs, this Main Street approach. Generally, Main Street organizations, they have a paid executive director, but then the rest of the work is done by volunteer-driven committees. So you do have issues here with capacity and sophistication. There are about 860 nationally accredited Main Street America programs. They tend to be found more often in smaller towns and rural areas rather than urban and metropolitan areas. Next slide. And these 860 programs nationwide are coordinated by various statewide Main Street programs. California Main Street is one of them. There are 18 accredited Main Streets across the state, including Livermore, Martinez, Pleasanton, and Richmond. But as you can see here, this image showing the breakdown of revenue for Downtown Martinez and Company, which is a Main Street. Budgets are going to be vulnerable, quite vulnerable to violent swings. You can imagine how they were badly hurt amidst COVID. If your revenue is based on event income, partnerships and sponsorships and the city of Martinez, it was probably a rough 2020 for downtown Martinez and company. So again, there is a certain level of uncertainty that's just baked into this model. Next slide. So Community Development Corporation, I don't want to spend too much time in this. It might or might not really be relevant here. Again, these are also not self-sustaining. They're funded by grants and foundations, intermediaries, as well as institutions, universities, for instance, and in some cases, the private sector. And what distinguishes them really is that their work plan includes actual real estate development. And over the years, they've tended to focus more on affordable housing in low and moderate income communities, but some do undertake commercial projects and even in downtown settings. Now, CDCs may or may not be place specific. I mean, obviously you've got ones like the Chinatown Community Development Center in San Francisco or the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation, but then you have Bridge Housing, which is a CDC, but that is not place specific. As we know, they've developed far and wide. Next slide. Okay, so business improvement district. And business improvement district, that's how it's known across the country and beyond. In California, especially in the Bay Area, it can be referred to as a community benefit district. For the purposes of our conversation today, we should consider those synonymous. Business improvement districts, they are permitted by statewide enabling legislation and or a local procedural ordinance. And what's important for me to say today is that forming a business improvement district is a specialty all by itself. It's that complicated and that labor intensive that there are consultants who are specifically with specific expertise to make one of these happen. I do not happen to be one of them. So just to say that going in. But if it is something that you're going to want to pursue, there will be that specialized consultant that you'll probably need to shepherd it forward. Now, an important nuance about bids, they can be merchant-based, property-based, or a combination of the two. Okay, so you can have a business improvement district that's only based on, that's funded only by assessments on businesses, not property owners. And then you could have a property-based bid, which is funded with assessments on property owners, or you can have a combination of the two. If you look at downtown San Jose, they have areas where it's a property-based bid and areas where it's a business-based bid. In most of the rest of the country, when someone says bid, they mean a property-based bid. It's to some degree a unique quirk of California that we had this pretty long period where there were only business-based bids or merchant-based bids. In fact, California didn't enable bids until first in 1989, and then with a second piece of legislation in 1994. So California was a bit slow to this party, partly, I suspect, due to the prominence of redevelopment agencies here in California. But for whatever reason, we were pretty much late to this party. And so we still have this kind of separation between these earlier merchant-based bids and then the property-based bids. And as you can imagine, property-based bids can raise a lot more money, right? On average, 5 to 10 times more money from their assessments. So obviously a property-based bid is going to be able to do a lot more. It's going to have a lot more resources, a lot more capacity. To make this even more complicated, these can be combined with some of the other models I already described. You can have a business improvement district that's also a main street, that's also a community development corporation. A few examples here in the Bay Area, Burlingame and Palo Alto are both merchant-based bids. San Jose and Oakland are property-based bids. San Jose, as I described, though, also has a portion which is just a merchant-based bid. Okay, so if you got all that, let's go to the next slide. All right, so the way these work is that they're created by a 50.1% vote of the assessed property and business or business owners. So not every property and or business owner is created equal, right? It's based on the assessed value. And then they ultimately have to be approved by city council. But what's most important for our purposes is that even if it's only created by 50.1%, everyone has to pay the assessment. No one is exempt. Governments are not exempt. Nonprofits are not exempt. Even residents within the boundaries are not exempt. Okay. It can be passed by a simple majority of the assessed value, but then everyone has to pay that assessment. Now, that said, you can design bids so that there are different service levels. There can be a zone A, which is kind of the premium service level, and then you could have a zone B, which is kind of secondary level of service. So there are ways to kind of segment it based on what these different stakeholders are willing to tolerate. Also important about bids, they have to be renewed. They do not exist in perpetuity. Merchant-based bids have to be renewed every year. Property-based bids have an initial 5-year term, then they have to be renewed. If they are renewed, then that renewal lasts for another 10 years, right? They always have to be kind of always have to be considering how this will look at the end of the term to the people who have to vote to renew it. Next slide. Bids tend to be operated by a paid executive director and staff, overseen by a board of directors, which consists of the property and or business owners. And their work plan is actually specified in what's called a management district plan, which is filed as part of the contract with the municipality. And they have to adhere to that management district plan, or else they risk getting sued. Meetings are subject to the Brown Act. And also to understand about bids, they outsource a lot of what they do. They contract with third-party service providers, for instance, for the clean and safe portion, what you might have heard of as called ambassadors, people in jackets of a certain color in downtown Berkeley. It happens to be, I guess, yellow. Those are usually outsourced. In fact, sometimes the entire management of the bid is outsourced. There will be an executive director and a staff, but a good amount of the work will be done by third parties. Next slide. Okay, to finish up, I just wanted to go through some of the advantages and disadvantages of bids. Obviously, they provide a platform for the business community. They give them a voice, a channel for expressing concerns and getting their needs met, without which they might just leave the district. Chinatown in Oakland just approved a bid, and it was very much spurred by the feeling among many property and business owners that the city was just completely failing with clean and safe. And there was just a sense of being fed up and taking matters into their own hands. So it provides this platform in the business community that is independent of the municipal budgeting process. It's not subject to annual outlays from the general fund. And also, it's able to sidestep messy politics. It's able to avoid the conflicts of interest inherent in the public sector. For instance, a city or a municipality has to concern itself with the entirety of its footprint, not just a specific district. And so this can create certain conflicts of interest when the municipality is in charge of spearheading improvements. Why aren't you doing it for my part of town? You could kind of sidestep that if you actually form a bid, because that bid's mandate is specific to that place, to that district. Generates guaranteed revenue stream. Everyone has to pay for it, whether they like it or not, which means a number of things. First, it ensures ongoing maintenance of capital improvements and public infrastructure. Someone's always going to be making sure that that green space remains clean and appealing. But also it means that bids can fill voids resulting from budget shortfalls. Now, I say that, you know, a little bit sheepishly, because the reality is that bids are only supposed to be providing services above and beyond what the municipality is already providing. A bid is not meant to fill the void of a budget shortfall, right? But the reality is, and we saw this particularly in the early months of COVID, that because their funding source is based on assessments, it's less elastic than the cities. And so there are times when the bid is in a better position to spearhead initiatives, particularly during recessionary periods, because there's a lag with assessments, as we know. Also, bids tend to take a more entrepreneurial approach, typically not as bogged down by rules and processes and ways of doing things. Bids can help a downtown remain competitive. If you think about it, large shopping centers have always had the advantage of unified management and marketing. A bid is kind of an attempt to roughly approximate that. It's similar in certain ways to a mall manager. Indeed, you know, mall tenants pay what's called common area maintenance charges. That's what really a bid assessment should be thought of as, right? Next slide. Okay, criticisms. And I'm not saying I'm making these criticisms. These are just the criticisms that you will often hear. Bids are often viewed as an additional tax, and this you hear that from property owners most of all, viewed as an additional tax for services that the city should be providing. Why should I be paying extra for clean and safe? That's what the city's supposed to be doing with the tax dollars I'm already sending their way. That's the argument, right? And indeed, as I had described, bid services are limited to quote unquote particular and distinct benefits to assess business or property over and above general benefits. And there have been recalcitrant property owners who have sued bids because they feel their tax dollars their assessments are not necessarily going towards benefits that they are able to benefit from. So that's a big area of criticism. You do also get pushback from certain types of businesses. Doctors and dentists don't feel they're kind of in the same category as retailers and restaurants, might not feel they should have to pay the tax or at least the same amount of tax. Another criticism, these bids will increase occupancy costs for tenants. Think about it, if it's a merchant-based bid, well, they're the ones that are paying the assessment. If it's a property-based bid, technically they're not paying the assessment, but in most cases, that assessment is passed through to the tenant, right? So the tenant ends up paying it anyway. Okay, so it does increase occupancy costs to tenants, and that can have an effect on their sustainability as tenants. Can they afford those occupancy costs? There's also the criticism that bids benefit business and property interests primarily. It's using tax dollars to benefit narrow interests. You particularly hear this with regard to the argument that bids in effect privatize public space, specifically with regard to their approach to homelessness, to the unhoused population. So those are some of the criticisms. And again, bids sometimes do not get renewed. Fruitvale in Oakland has not renewed after 20 years. On January 1st, 2022, their bid will cease to exist because ultimately property owners, especially absentee ones, could not be convinced to keep paying for such services as litter or graffiti removal. So these two, there is a recall provision of sorts, which is sometimes exercised, which definitely has a way of keeping business improvement districts on their toes. Final slide. Just want to make the point, bids are not for everyone. And my good friend and colleague, Brad Siegel of Puma, some of you might know him. He's been quite active in California. He is one of these specialists that lives and breathes bids. And, you know, when I talk to him, he says, you know, bids work when there are certain elements already in place. And these include, you know, a process that's clearly driven by private sector leaders with local government as he calls it low-key yet dependable supporter, but able and willing to kind of underwrite the initial process, which can be quite labor intensive, takes usually anywhere from 9 to 18 months. Money is needed to hire the consultant, to develop marketing materials, to retain legal counsel. You know, there's that sort of public-private partnership that has to be in place, or at least a potential for it. A partnership that's really inclusive of all interests, public, private, as well as other key stakeholders. So it's a very, it's a tool which can really provide you with a great deal of capacity to do some pretty ambitious things. But again, it is not indicated everywhere. So anyway, on that note, I know that's again a lot of information. We'll probably revisit some of it in the Q&A, but now let me hand it back to David.
Thanks, Mike. That was great.
Okay.
And Jim, if well, I'm going to talk to you about activating downtowns. And so if you go to the next slide. I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to sort of lay the lay the groundwork, if you will, for what you know, what makes retail work. And retail is driven by demand. So the demand always comes first. The retail follows. And you know, the most reliable and most important source of demand are residents. And in the case of downtown Santa Clara, you've of course got the residence base, you know, in and around downtown, and then going out further, and downtown will be a destination. So we're talking about, you know, a much wider catchment than, you know, just walking distance. But then there also is this, you know, kind of funky population base, which are non-permanent residents, the University of Santa Clara, or Santa Clara University student base. And they're there part of the year and they're gone part of the year. And so if, you know, any of you that are familiar with college towns, I went to school in Claremont, very similar to Santa Clara in some ways. The retail ecosystem in some ways revolves around the university, yet at the same time, the university isn't something that can sustain it on its own. So if you go to the next slide, you know, I tend to look at retail sort of on a continuum, where commodities are on one end and specialty goods and services are on the other. And you know, so commodities generally are, you know, the stuff that we use every day, whereas specialty is the stuff we experience and that we splurge on. And more than anything, what I really want to emphasize is that different kinds of retail, you know, these really describe different shopping behaviors. You know, a grocery store run, a trip to Best Buy, you know, that's a much different shopping behavior than I'm going to go window shopping and go out to dinner. And so, you know, the downtown in Santa Clara is really likely to be a specialty retail district, not a commodity retail district. There's already plenty of commodity retail in and around Santa Clara, and there really isn't the kind of facility that's appropriate to commodity retail in downtown. So if you go to the next slide, you know, there are a number of practices that are really key to activation. You know, one is authenticity. You know, another is having, you know, the appropriate kinds of storefronts, the appropriate massing, visibility, you know, paying particular attention to corners. Retailers are very keen on corners. Those are the places where you get the highest rent. They're the gateway intersections and what have you. So, you know, paying attention to build form. And of course, this is what, you know, WRT and Sargent is, you know, leading the charge on here. If you go to the next slide, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have heard the term complete streets, but in my world, I think in terms of complete sidewalks. And the reason is that sidewalks are where the public realm meets the private realm. And frankly, it's where the two can merge in terms of outdoor displays, in terms of outdoor seating. And so they're really, really important that that they be done right, that they're that they're wide, that they're designed with the idea that activity is going to happen on them. And so again, something that I know is being addressed as part of the planning and code work that's going on. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about active and inactive retail. So, active retail is where the pedestrian interacts with the built space or the retail space. And inactive is where the flow of the district is broken and you don't interact. And I've, given you pictures here. So, even if you don't go in a space, if you're interacting with it, that's active. And that's what we want. That's window shopping. That's the, let's go to, fill in the name of your, your favorite district. Maybe it's Willow Glen. Maybe it's, one of the downtown streets on the peninsula, like University Avenue and Palo Alto, or 4th Street in San Mateo. But, those are areas that have a lot of active retail. If you go to the next slide, where this all comes together with the complete sidewalks and the active retail is storefront transparency. And there are a number of cities that have incorporated storefront transparency into their design guidelines or even into their codes. And the graphic that you're looking at in the top picture is actually from the city of San Francisco. I've given you a lot of detail here, but the idea is that you can easily see into the space from the pedestrian eye level, and you don't have things blocking the window, which means that the window itself is not blocked, and then there's actually space going into the store that's not blocked also. And when you have good storefront transparency, that's a prerequisite for being able to have active retail. Active space doesn't necessarily need to just be active retail space. A great example was how WeWork designed their space on Santa Clara Street in San Jose. You'll walk by, their lobby was essentially an extension of one of their lounges. They had chairs, they had outlets, they had tables. If you were going to meet somebody at WeWork, you'd be delighted to be meeting in the lobby. But as a pedestrian, as you're going by, you're looking in. It's interesting. You're seeing what's going on, and it's a non-retail space. So these transparency requirements are important not just for retail, but really for ground floor. If you go to the next slide, signage and lighting can be very important. I'm going to, strongly recommend a master sign program for the entire downtown area. This is really going to be, signage design guidelines. It would be a master sign program if it was a shopping center, for example. But, the idea is that you have appropriate signage. And so, that might mean that you have certain information, such as decals that are on windows, or for a pedestrian walking district that you have blade signs, because blade signs are appropriate to the way a pedestrian interacts with an area, whereas storefront signage might be more appropriate to the way a vehicle would interact with a retail area. And then, of course, lighting. And lighting not only makes you feel safe, but it really can set a mood, as you can see from the pictures here. If you go to the next slide, there are also other kinds of signage besides signage, and I call these beacons. And this is where you go to find out where to go. Whether it's Yelp or Google Reviews or Eater, those are all places that you might go to if you're trying to find, a certain kind of restaurant. And as a business operator, you want to have a really solid presence or footprint on those platforms, because it's a way of communicating the value proposition to customers. And so these are really important ways to be able to draw people to a district. And I think that, yeah, and this is something that a bid certainly could be doing. It would fall squarely within marketing, but it's helping businesses manage their social platform presence and helping them with best practices for how to make sure they have one, and that the presence is actually reaching out. Influencers are one way of doing that. If you go to the next slide, I also want to talk a little bit about, the relationship to public spaces. We've done a lot of sort of setting the groundwork. Now I want to apply it. And, public spaces are not just parks. I mean, this is about activation. It really, the goal is to get people to linger longer. And people want to be where people are. It's the old, Yogi Berra cliche, nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded. And that's really what you're trying to create. And there are a variety of public spaces in which that can be created. We've already talked about the sidewalks, but intersections are a natural place. Plazas, parking lots, bike shares, transit stops, anywhere that people gather is an opportunity. And I don't know how many of you might be from back east or the Midwest. I'm from the Midwest. It would snow every winter. And as soon as it snowed, you would actually see people's true paths of travel, because you see, the path that people are cutting through the snow. And so similarly, when you're looking at a public district, you want to look at where are the people naturally gathering. I mean, that's telling you where they naturally want to be. And then how do you then go about leveraging, making it even more welcoming, making them want to be there even more, and then beginning to fill in between those spots. So if we go to the next slide, lots of different activities that can help activate a retail district or commercial district. And, and these can be events. It's not, every event doesn't need to be a huge production. It could be just a regularly scheduled event. It could be the food trucks coming in every Thursday or every other Wednesday, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a street fair that's going to get 100, 150,000 people to come. It could be maker spaces, that are really, kind of almost temporary, permanent temporary kinds of spaces that makers and artists can come in. Regular events like farmers markets. You want musicians to come play on the street corner. Musicians, with their hat out and their guitar case open, that's great. That's adding character to an area. That's not a nuisance when you're trying to really activate an area. And events can also be indoors. I mean, if you have a vacant retail space, get groups in there, offer it out, because that turns it from inactive space to active space. If you go to the next slide, we also want to talk about connectivity between areas, between downtown and the university, the intermodal, the BART, and Amtrak station, the Civic Center, apologies for the typo there, parks and residential areas. I mean, these are all elements that need to have connectivity. And again, that's part of the base plan that we've been working on since 2019. If you go to the next slide, we alluded to activating empty storefronts before. So if you have a space that hasn't been occupied yet, or maybe is between tenants, we don't want it to be a hole in the fabric of the street. And so we want to turn those inactive storefronts as much as possible into active storefronts. Pop-ups are a great idea at any time, because, if you're going somewhere and you're like, what, they always have an interesting pop-up, you don't know what it's going to be. It's like going to Costco and you don't know what's going to be on sale. It's a reason to go. It's a reason to go back. And so pop-ups are great. They can also be great for an area that's fully leased. I mean, reserve a couple of places deliberately for pop-ups so that there's always something interesting and new going on. Banners that promote the entire district, storefront displays, and then again, offering storefronts to community groups or not-for-profits at no charge or nominal charge. All of those things bring people to the area. And what we want is people coming into the area and having reasons to come to the area. That's what activation is. If you go to the next slide, I've given you a whole list of areas, that have been really successful. And I think that a common denominator between all of these areas is that they've kind of grown up organically. And we're going to do something here where it's not going to grow up organically over decades. It's going to kind of happen, you know, in terms of the life of a city all at once. And but we want to think about it in terms of you know, what has made organic areas really work well. And we want to encourage, you know, natural retail evolution. We're going to lay the framework for that to happen. But what we really want to remember is, you know, the retail experience needs to be customized and localized. And this is another, you know, this is another function that a bid can help serve. I know this is something that Mike helps bids with in his consulting practice. At the end of the day, you want differentiation. You want this to be different. You don't want, you know, the same 15 tenants that you find in every single place that you go. You want something that's new and different and fresh. And if you go to the next slide, you know, in terms of thriving districts, you know, you really need to create a vision. A lot of work has gone into that so far, but we need to think big about corridors, about aggregating parcels, entire city blocks. We can check that box. Creating connections, yes. Pedestrian-friendly environment, yes. But most importantly, you know, every revitalization needs a champion. And a champion is not necessarily a politician. The champion needs to be there, you know, across a much longer period than simply an election cycle. And so, you know, it's an advocate, and the advocate might be an organization. It might be a person. You can find examples of each. And finally, part of it is also knowing when to say no. It's knowing when, you know what, that use is the wrong use, and we'd rather wait for the right thing. And being lucky, and I define luck as when opportunity meets preparation, and there is a huge amount of preparation going into this. And I think that we're going to find a really huge opportunity. So last slide, go to questions and answers. I think we went slightly over 30 minutes, so apologies for that, but a lot of information, which I hope was helpful.
Great, thank you, David and Michael. So I want to turn it back over to the task force for questions and discussions. But one of the things that is on my mind, and that, you know, we've started to talk about with David and Michael, is, you know, we don't have these businesses in place, right? And we want to build this downtown over time, over some period of time. So how can we start with a structure that can start activating, you know, even before the first phase is there? You know, how can we start to create a sense of place? You know, is that a early iteration of a bid that then grows each time they, you know, they renew their bid? So that's something that I'm interested in, and you know, I'd love to hear Michael, maybe your thoughts on that, and then I want to turn this over to other questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's not it's not as likely to be through kind of a formal structure, I suppose. You know, it's more going to be proponent driven, right? That this, you know, whether it's on this task force or just in this group of stakeholders, you know, but what's interesting is the ways in which actually that sort of pre-formation effort can almost serve as a testing grounds for what kind of, you know, UPMO is ultimately you know, kind of explored. You know, you'll get a lot of you'll get a lot of information, a lot of data on just how committed stakeholders are to something more formal, just by, you know, kind of proceeding with these more informal initiatives before any sort of organization is any sort of effort to create a organization is commenced. But yeah, I think in these early stages, it's probably going to be driven by by major stakeholders, whether it is the city, whether it is the university, whether it is major property owners. And it's going to be kind of on a more informal basis necessarily.
Great, thanks. All right, back over to Adam and Leslie, I guess, to for any discussion that we want to continue with.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, David, and Jim for the presentation. Looks great. So I'll open it up to the task force members. Questions, comments for discussion. Can I actually see hands again or no? Let's see. Go ahead, Anna.
Hi, everyone. We had researched this in the past. I believe Manuel Pineda might have been involved in this. On the city website, there is a bid that was established in the 90s. I guess the question is it still functioning? Was it renewed? And who's running that? There's also a gentleman, Ken Sinclair, who is the president of the Santa Clara Merchants Association. There's a question of whether, at what stage is this dysfunctional? Can it be revitalized? I mean, what would be the next step if we wanted to get this rolling?
I'd certainly be interested in hearing more about this earlier bid. I'm assuming it's no longer in existence. And also, Mr. Sinclair, I mean, is his Merchants Association, is that specific to this study area, or is it citywide, and how active is it, and what does it work? Is its work plan consist of? Do people feel that it's really moving the needle? Questions like that.
He does run the current farmers market, so
Okay.
I know that's one of his functions. He's still listed as the president of that merchant association. As far as activity, I see it at a very minimal, and I don't understand. I know it does cover it. He explained to me, this president, that it covers it from Lincoln Street to Lafayette Street, which is pretty much most of the downtown.
Yeah.
So it could be, it just needs a jump start or some kind of investigation to see how we could reinvent it or make it work for us now versus what it was doing before.
Right.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I could tell you that it did have typical stuff like establishing a board of directors and such. I'm not aware that a board of directors exists other than the one gentleman. So, and there is a fee schedule for it, and there's a benefit assessment that the businesses pay.
So it is a business-based business improvement district then.
Yeah, it was created in 1999. It does have, I can tell you the list of items that the business improvement district is supposed to provide: promotion of public events, furnishing of music in any public place, promotion of tourism and activities which benefit the businesses located in the area. So not very detailed, but.
And that's the Santa Clara Merchants Association. And that's the same as Anna, what you were saying was formed in the 90s.
It's the downtown business improvement district.
Okay.
And what are the limits of that, Leslie? Do you know the boundaries?
I can tell you, one second here. It is. Boundaries. Oh, there's supposed to be an attachment, but there's no attachment.
Okay.
So I'll have to find that. It says the attachment A, but there's no attachment A.
And just to be clear, so that is the same as or separate from Ken Sinclair's Santa Clara
The
Merchant
same.
Association? Oh, it's the same,
I think it's the same.
but it does not have a board of directors?
It does not. And it doesn't seem to have an expiration date in the text of it at all. Like
Yeah,
I
because
said,
I think by law, it's supposed to have a board of directors.
right. It says there should be one, but I
Mhm.
don't believe there is one.
Interesting. Okay.
So it
there's-
sounds
there's-
like those are some documents that Michael's going to want to study.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can send it to him. Yes. It's on the city's website as well, but I'll send it to you.
Okay, yeah.
There doesn't seem to be any language about expiration or renewal in this document.
I mean, is it possible that he's actually just using the terminology business improvement district?
Maybe.
Without awareness
I
that
don't
it's a
know.
term of art or a term of law.
That's something we should definitely
Okay.
figure out.
And is he himself a merchant?
I
Yes,
don't know. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't
Okay.
think so.
he has a
Yes,
business
yes, he
called
is.
Stampcraft, I believe.
Oh,
Sandcraft.
Stampcraft, yeah.
Oh, Stampcraft. Okay. That might be someone that we should be at least talking to. Okay. That is very interesting to know. We will definitely explore further.
I gotta unmute myself, I guess. All right, let me see. Any other, oh, there we go. So Dan,
Great job, Jim, Michael, and David. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. I wanted to talk to David Knight. I really agree on the importance of the interactive space, the windows. I love what you said there. Along with this, the importance of signage and having a master, I think you said a master signage program. And I'd love to talk to you, in depth on that. We've been doing a lot of work. Our group has been studying that quite a bit. There's one thing that you said it's, it's very hard, you used Healdsburg and Sonoma as a non-organic example of a design, but if you go back to when it was originally designed in, probably the turn of the century, 1910, something like that, the way it's designed, it's always worked. I've got a buddy who lives up there, and it's worked like that for years, as has Sonoma. And it's the beauty of the original design, which is quite like Santa Clara's original design. But I hate to admit this, my wife and I went to Santana Row, about a week ago. And although we don't want to be a Santana Row, it has aspects where people want to gather. And, they're doing something right there as far as, bringing people together in certain spots of that complex. So I just want to make those 2 points, I think.
So I would, interesting, if I had absolutely used, Healdsburg and Sonoma Square as, things that have evolved organically, but of course they were built, all at the same time, albeit long before, any of our memory.
Right.
They have evolved quite a bit over time, though.
Yep.
And I very deliberately did not bring up Santana Row because it's kind of the elephant in the room.
Exactly.
Can't tell you the number of conversations that, we want Santana Row. But I want to give you one anecdote about Santana Row. Jeff Kreshek is the head of leasing for Federal for the Western United States, and he's a good friend. And what Jeff would say to you is that for every great retail district or project, there's the anti-district or anti-project. And he'd say, so, for Fifth Avenue in New York, there's Soho. For Union Square, there's Valencia Street, you know, and so on and so forth. And when he took over the Santana Row project, this is, you know, well over 10 years ago now, you know, one of the things that he looked up and said is, you know, we can't compete with Valley Fair. You know, you've got 3 million, 5 square feet in Valley Fair. We can't compete with it. So we're going to be the anti-Valley Fair. And we're going to be something completely different. And we're going to be a different kind of experience than you would get going to the mall. And I think that part of the reason that Santana Row, which of course just, you know, landed there in one fell swoop, works as well as it did is it had that kind of a leasing and marketing vision behind it. And so I think that that's, I'm really glad that you brought the point up, you know, to allow me to expand on it with that anecdote.
Well, great, thank you. Great job too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Deborah?
Yes, thanks. I have two kind of questions here. The first one is we kind of zeroed in on bids pretty quickly. And I'm wondering if you have a good example of a bid in a mixed use environment where there's, you know, retail, work, live, and residential, and possibly some mom and pop stores along with office space. You know, would all of those be participants in the bid? And I think you mentioned one kind of tiered level of bid participation based on the type of business.
Yeah, well, most bids actually are mixed use districts because they're usually in traditional downtowns. So, you know, you're almost always with a mix of uses, and because they're downtowns, you know, you usually also with a mix of retail types as well. There are ways of, you know, of creating zones within the district that have, you know, that are assessed at different rates and are provided with different levels of benefits. You know, there are also I mean, again, part of this is within the purview of the city of Santa Clara in shaping the ordinance that enables bids in the way that you want. Now, it seems I took a little closer look at the 1999 bid creation, and it does seem like the city already has passed some legislation along these lines. And so it might already have stipulations for what is and is not, or does and does not have to be assessed, right? Mm-hmm. But there, you know, there is quite a bit of flexibility for the city to, you know, to include or exclude what it wants in terms of entities being assessed.
Yeah, okay, great. That was kind of a good lead into my second question, was around the ordinances or what we might have to have in the specific plan to make this a special area or have its own ordinances, specifically around things like live music. And you mentioned, you know, musicians standing on street corners and things like that, which I love. I think, you know, really following activation, you know, examples and best practices are going to be a key here. One of the things that is unique about this area is that the part of downtown that's the furthest away from the Merchants Association lead, for lack of a better term, he's at the opposite end and will benefit in the last group of people probably as this development happens. So I think we want to make sure that we have some, code around what's going to be permitted and how it's going to be supported even before development happens at the far west end of Franklin Street.
Well, and to be clear, there's this citywide procedural ordinance. There's then the management district plan, which a bid or a proposed bid needs to submit, and that will actually function as the guide for what it can and cannot do. But some of what you're talking about is actually more along the lines of what's included in a zoning code or in a downtown plan, rather than what would be included in a management district plan. So there's obviously different documents here which can regulate what happens in what arenas. But yeah, some of what you're saying probably falls more within the bailiwick of a zoning code or design guidelines or a specific plan or something along those lines. And Jim, feel free to interject here. I guess this kind of gets into what you're doing.
Yeah, some of those things you're correct, would be in our zoning code that we're doing along with the precise plan document.
Yep.
Okay.
The allowance of them in the use table.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you, Deborah. Butch?
Hello, everybody. Michael, Jim, David, thank you. Great presentation. I want to preface this by saying that I was a part of the original San Jose Downtown Association when we started the bid system back in 1986 and continued it through. I sat on the board of directors for 12 years on that institution, so I've been actively involved in the San Jose bid for quite a few number of years. A couple of things I wanted to mention, because this does parallel San Jose quite a bit. I think the first one is, Michael, when you'd mentioned we don't have something there yet, and that's going to be the key that we have to address. How do we get through this phase one of pre-building, pre-merchants? How do we keep the activation going? And I think that's going to be the hardest part. How do we get people committed? How do we get people involved? And who are the stakeholders that are going to be able to maintain that? Because it's not going to be the city, and it shouldn't be the city. It should be the community. One of the first things we did in downtown San Jose is we actually made mini districts, which have flourished over the years. We started out with the South First Street, the SOFA district, which was the entertainment district on South First Street. We had a little bit in San Pedro Square where we started putting restaurants there. And we also had Alive After 5, which was the original group, which was the arts groups coming together to create a district in downtown. And from there, we started building critical mass over the years, and that took us into really our formal BID run by the Downtown Association. So that's the first point. Second point is, I really feel the term BID is outdated. We keep talking about a business improvement district. A BID, in my opinion, is not just a business improvement district. We have to look at it in the sense of what David was saying was about this connectivity, about the stakeholders, about the champions. So when you start looking at this, it's really about the businesses and the property owners, but also the residents, the nonprofits, and anybody else who's involved with the downtown. And I sometimes think when we call something a business improvement district, as a resident in a downtown, I don't feel that I'm a part of that. So I'll always have felt that this term BID is a little bit outdated and should be much more inclusive when we talk about it. A clarification, because this is a problem we ran into when we started the BID in San Jose, is people kept talking about tax. In order to make it work, you have to tax. Well, it's not a tax. My understanding is the BID assessments in the state are technically fees, not taxes. and can't be used for general governmental purposes.
You're right.
And the thing that the issue we had when we tried to start the BID in San Jose was people kept talking about, you're taxing me, and you're going to be doing things. And I think, Michael, you even mentioned it, trash control and graffiti and things like that. We very quickly understood that that was something that was detrimental to what we were trying to do. So we flipped the whole marketing campaign about, we're not here to take over the city. We're not a part of the city. It was so important to be that nonprofit that was not connected to the city. And we really pushed that we did supplemental services that the city could not do. And I think that's a key point when you're talking about what this district is. So if the district couldn't clean the sidewalks, which Groundworks does for the city because they didn't have funds, we were able to, with the Downtown Association, to step in and say, here's a service we can offer because the city can't, or the city won't, or the city can't afford it. So I think how you speak about a BID is very, very important. It's not just business-based, it's community-based. And again, I think you touched on this too. If funding it is important, you've got to have a base amount of funds because you need to make it sustainability. Yes, the property assessment is tough to get through because you do have those absentee landlords, but it's something you should do. The other thing which we found interesting, because we thought it would be turned down, is we started with the property assessments, went to the businesses, and the businesses, even though they were getting the property assessment put onto them, they were still interested in paying that business assessment fee because it was in their best interest.
Yeah.
So again, it's how you kind of put that together. What else did I have on this?
Anything else, Butch?
I didn't. Oh, I did have one other question that wasn't pertaining to the BID very quickly. In talking with David, you had mentioned on the storefronts, the idea of being able to look in and see what's happening inside the store. And I agree. I think that's very, very important. But I also think there is something to be said for that window shopping aspect of it. You walk by FAO Schwartz in New York and you see that window display. That's vibrant, it's active, it's alive. So I don't think we're talking an either or. I think we're looking at a balance of a combination. Is that what you're recommending, or are you going one direction?
Yeah, so the transparency requirements, Jim, can you go back a couple of slides real quick to the transparency one? I think it's slide 25. And so so Butch, and I don't want to bore everybody with the gory details on this, but what they're really talking about is having a certain percentage of the storefront being transparent, and have that 60% be within a certain part of the storefront that relates to where your eye level is. So it's not, just an edict that the entire thing is transparent. So there's definitely room for window display. There's definitely room for that kind of vibrancy. And I completely agree with you that there is a distinction there and that both are desirable.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I could just add a few things, Butch, I think a number of very very good comments. I think that's probably, not knowing the specifics, probably one of the reasons why they've come to be known as community benefit districts in the Bay Area, where the politics can be particularly dicey. Sometimes you also hear them referred to as special assessment districts. I feel like that's a little colder. A community benefit district probably is a little more approachable. But yes, you're right. And I tried to avoid using the word tax, except when referencing how it is criticized, that it is then reframed as a tax for the purposes of undermining its support. But you're right. It's technically, I think it's technically a fee, not a tax. But that's very much in all of the opposition. You constantly hear, oh, this is just another tax.
Right, and that assessment is similar to if you get a library assessment or a
Right.
school assessment or something like that on your property taxes. But oftentimes it's called a tax, and it's hard to counter that if it's out there. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep.
All right, thanks, Butch. Rena?
Yeah, Michael and David, I was curious, in your experiences, if bids have gotten involved with leasing of vacant spaces. I was looking at your last slide where I think, and you weren't necessarily speaking to bids, but it was know when to say no, right? And when you talked about federal, right, with Santana Row, they're like one property owner, manager, and they have the eye where they're looking out for the whole area. Whereas when we're creating a downtown, individual property owners are going to want to lease their own spaces. So I'm just wondering if the bid gets involved with somehow trying to curate an environment. Have you seen that happen? And the second question I have is, have you seen bids get involved in parking management?
Mike,
Yeah.
this is all you.
Yeah. So the first question, yes. And actually, I've been pushing bids to play more of a role with, for lack of a better term, curating, because I think there's a real void. And I won't go into too much of this, but in the way that the private sector actors, whether they're landlords or brokers, are incentivized, it's not necessarily to spend the time or take the risk on the kinds of tenants that can add to this greater whole, because they're only incentivized to think about their space, right? And so in contrast to a Santana Row, where you've got one entity doing all of it, right, and thinking in those terms, your landlords and your brokers are thinking just in terms of matching a tenant to their one space. They're not thinking about synergies. They're not thinking about how to create this greater whole, right? And so I think that's an appropriate role of a bid, and one that an increasing number are willing to explore. And I can get into more of the detail about what that looks like. More often than not, it's in such a way as to try to coalesce the landlords and brokers around a broader vision, with the understanding you're only going to get so many of them on board at first. But if you want to get even more ambitious about it, and only a few bids have even considered this, there are some that have been willing even to countenance taking master leases on spaces. That's a lot of risk for a business improvement district to assume, as you can imagine, because you're on the hook for that lease, right? But whether it's for a public market or some other sort of leasing strategy, to take a master lease on a space and to then kind of be the one that curates what's in it. But that's, now in terms of your second question, which was parking management, yes, a number of bids have actually contracted with their municipal governments to handle the management of parking resources within their district. One that I was, that's been doing this, for instance, I'm gonna give you some more information on this, downtown Tempe community, which is Tempe, Arizona, which, as you might know, it's technically a suburb of Phoenix, but it's the home of Arizona State University, and which is, I think, one of the largest, if not the largest, student body in the United States, like 60,000 students, and they're right next to Mill Avenue, the main retail corridor. And you can imagine 60,000 students, what that will do to your parking resources. And so downtown Tempe community, which is the property-based bid, has assumed the management of the parking resource within their district on a contract with the city of Tempe. So yes, in answer to your question, yes and yes.
Thank you, Michael.
Yep.
Rob?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for both of your presentations. It was fantastic. more information, a lot of information to process. The one thing that struck me is what I loved is what David said about the anti, you're doing the anti thing, and we do kind of want to be the anti Santana Row. We want to be authentic. Santana Row's never been authentic from an architectural, organic development type of thing. And so that's our opportunity. And what I said early on in this whole process is that we tried to decide, are we just a local destination or are we a broader destination? As broad a destination as you can make it is going to make you way more competitive than anybody else. So that's where it has to be really special with the stage that we're trying to set for the performance of community engagement, right? It's all about that. And I love what Butch was saying about how, it's an outdated term. It's really about community, right? It's about more than the businesses. I mean, we all want this to be a community benefit, which also benefits business owners, stakeholders, property owners, you name it. So those are all fantastic points. I'm trying to think this. Is there any, I guess it makes sense to me that if you do the bid based on the property owners, they have a longer you hope merchants have a long interest, but a property owner probably has a lot more at stake in terms of taking care of the building and everything. Whereas if you throw it onto the merchant, there could be a little disconnect possibly, or discontinuity. Is that, but Palo Alto, you said, has a merchant base, but they have a very strong, they have history already. Is that, why do they do that, or what's the story behind that?
Well, I don't know the specifics there. Sometimes it's just a matter of the property owners weren't willing to go for it. That can always be the case. But you're right. You're right, Rob, to point to the potential conflicts between property owners and business owners. Just one example, in theory, if part of the purpose of a property-based business improvement district is to lift property values, well, what does that usually mean for tenants? It means higher rents, right? And also remember, property taxes are also passed through to the tenant usually, not always, but usually. So when property values go up, that's not necessarily good for your tenants. So there can definitely be cases where the two are not exactly on the same page with what they want to see happen. But if I were to guess, and again, not knowing the specific history of Palo Alto, a lot of times, it's a merchant-based bid. They might have tried to get a property-based bid, and it just couldn't. They couldn't get approval. They couldn't get approval from 50.1% of the assessed value, and so it just didn't happen. So there's often a history there which explains it.
The other thing that I like that you said is I worked for Gap Inc. for a couple years with their stores, and they were always desired, at least back then. Now they're discounting everything, so they're not in as strong a position as they were when the previous CEO was involved. But when you look at it, a mall is owned by one property owner, so they are strategically deciding who the the main places are within it, the draw, and then how they fill it in. So it's a strategy to make it all work. Whereas if we have a downtown with, hopefully more individual property owners, we don't want to be a Santana Row. You have to have somebody that's sort of guiding or helping, push or nudge it in the right direction, so we don't end up with necessarily all, chain stores and stuff like that. And so that's where the bid comes in a way, or some management district is. How does that work in terms of influence, though, in terms of who comes in, or is there, I don't know.
Well, it's a good question. And speaking of Tempe, this is a good example. You've got multiple property owners in a business district, as opposed to the single property owner for a mall. Yeah. And it's a kind of a sort of prisoner's dilemma. to get game theory on you, that basically if every property owner did what was in their best interest, tried to maximize the rent on a street like Mill Avenue in Tempe, what you get is one long stretch of mediocre sub shop chains, right? You get, and then no one wants to really go there except for lunch, maybe, you know, and the property owner, the value of their properties are not maximized, right? So the whole idea is, how do we make the case for these property owners on their own having a somewhat broader vision? And, you know, one of the ways that we've done this, and I should have mentioned this before when I was talking about this in response to Risa, is that as a kind of SOP to get them engaged, you know, I get that property owners and brokers, they are incentivized to go for lack of a better term, you call the lowest hanging fruit. I don't begrudge them that. If that's what I did for a living, I might do the same thing. I don't begrudge them for that. But that's the way they're incentivized, right? If a bid can play a role in prospecting and vetting alternatives that still meet some level of creditworthiness, right? That they're not just, you know, fly-by-night operations. They have a track record. If a bid can play a role in prospecting and vetting alternatives, and then almost hand them on a silver platter to those property owners and brokers, so that they can then consummate the deal. That's kind of the way that this can work, so that everyone gets a little of what they want. You know, and ultimately it works to the property owner's benefit, because in theory, at least, you get a retail mix that is more synergistic, greater than the sum of its parts, and the property values increase as a result. This is all very, you know, kind of abstract. I get that. But that's kind of the thinking. And that's something that a bid can do, that some bids do. There are a lot of specifics in making sure that not one property owner or broker is favored. You know, and so there's a way of doing that to make sure that it's very transparent. But there's also a trust building aspect of that too.
Thank you for that. It's the prospecting word is great, because that it's really like a kind of a grassroots effort, saying reaching out to others. And then the last thing I'll finish, Adam, is just that this district or this group is educating also property owners and business owners to be a group, right? We all want it to happen. So that's the good thing. You're developing the relationships. So that's another important aspect, but thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Yep.
All right. I don't see any other hands up from the DCTF members. Anybody have any questions before we move to public comment? All right.
You know, just a comment, Adam, if I could. I think, you know, a really great thing that's come out of this conversation is the notion of the bid, or let's call it the CBD, because that's more community oriented label. You know, having this role as curator of helping merchants understand the whole ecosystem so that they're willing participants in something that's very you know, well thought through. You're all going to a great deal of trouble to craft a downtown so that, you know, that same level of attention can go into you know, just curating the tenant mix and ensuring that you've got this, you know, really successful ecosystem. So I think it's a really interesting notion, and maybe something that we can explore further as Michael and David continue their work.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Leslie, can we open up public comment?
You can.
Let's open up public comment. Let me see if I can actually. All right, I see one hand. Donna?
Go ahead, Donna. You should be able to unmute yourself and speak.
Okay. Can you hear me?
There you go. Hi, Donna. Yes.
Hi. Just one real quick question, and this is either for, or it's probably both for WRT and the city. I've recently started receiving emails from a marketing agency from Rivermark Northside. I used to get these before the pandemic. Do they what do they have? I went to the I looked at the website and there's an agency running it. What do they have in place for their neighborhood? They are offering gift cards to shop, things like that. Just this month, I have 2 emails from them. And like I said, this was going on before the pandemic. So they have some type of marketing firm in place. And this might be good research for you from the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Appreciate it. Basil?
Okay, Joe. Basil, you should be able to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks. Really great meeting, guys. I want to support a recommendation to move City Hall in Santa Clara to the downtown. And I'd also like to support any other studies about how business models like cooperatives and how planning with a lot of the minority communities in Santa Clara can really create a special condition for downtown that's going to be different. I like that analogy of the anti Santana Row, but this is going to have to be an anti downtown San Jose because of its proximity, and also sort of the antithesis of the large development in North Santa Clara. Name's evading me right now. That's it.
Thank you, Basil. Are there any other hands from the public to comment, ask questions, or discuss this item number 1? Okay.
I see none.
I see none. Is there a motion from the DCTF to close public comment?
So moved.
All right.
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye. Or do we have to close it, Leslie, or no? I think.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. All right, public comments closed. Is there any DCTF member that would like to add anything based on public comments? No. I guess I haven't said anything, so I'll just ask one thing. Is there any difficulty with the private land versus the public land and how to integrate that and how to actually get something started? Like, do we have more control to require that anyone that takes, a lease or a sale of the city-owned land, that they would have to comply with falling into a CBID, or, what are the challenges? Because we have kind of 2 different land masses down here.
I mean, I suppose that, in as much as you're conveying the property, that would be, it could be a condition of sale, but in any event, if they own the land, if they then own the land, and then the process goes forward, they would, like any other property owner, be part of that process. If they don't own the land yet and the process goes forward and a bid is approved, then they buy it with that realization of the obligation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, we've had a lot of discussions about, a lot of people see the fees as more of a tax.
Yeah.
And, right now, I think especially as, the economy's got inflation and other things rise, kind of going awry, that, nobody's going to want to have to pay anymore. But I think that we've also discussed a lot of potential benefits and long-term benefits, not only for the property owners, but also the businesses and the, surrounding place, right? It makes a place, or helps make a place. And so I guess in all the conversation we had, I see it as, I don't think the private business or private property owners are going to be too intrigued by forming this thing and having to partake and pay. But I think because of the city owns, 6 acres, that it could be the catalyst that maybe it starts there with the new development and then hopefully continues, the value is perceived and seen as the development continues forward. So I don't know if there's a strategy to rolling something like this out, and if we can use our assets to leverage that catalyst to get it going.
Yeah, there's definitely a strategy to rolling it out. And that's partly what the specialized consultant specializes in, is precisely how you're going to maximize the likelihood of passage, and who you start with and who you leave until later, and then who's never going to be part of that 50.1%. So there's definitely a strategy involved once you start. But I think that yeah, I'll leave it at that.
When you talk about the 50.1%, you're talking about the overall land mass, right?
Talking about the assessed value. So it's 50.1% of the assessed value, which can become complicated because you don't necessarily need a majority of the property owners. You just need a majority of the assessed value. But then again, if you only have a few of the largest property owners, you might be setting yourself up for a lot of backlash. And again, ultimately, this has to pass city council. So yeah, I mean, but it is the assessed value, 50.1%.
Okay. So, I mean, I think that's even more to my point of and it would be the project assessed value, right? Because obviously we have a lot of raw land down there. We don't have buildings on it, but it would be whatever they're proposing would be their assessed value, correct?
I believe so, yeah.
So like their entitlement process, in the entitlement process, say I want to put, 300 units and 40,000 square feet of retail. Well, your assessed value is going to be based on your entitlements, not a parking.
Right.
Okay. I guess
yeah.
with DCTF, I mean, it's even more important than if this is something we're really interested in doing, is when we write the RFP for the land, that if this is something we're interested in, that would be the time that we would be able to guarantee that we'd have 51% of the assessed value, because the existing structures are fairly old and are going to be much lower value.
Michael?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted, because I'm a little surprised by that answer, actually. Assessed value. I thought it wouldn't just, I mean, there's like what's on the existing land, what's built, right? And then what's entitled. But then if you have what's entitled actually built, so I mean, I would imagine there's a gradation of what value is based on where it is. And those, like, you could have a property, you could have a parking lot, you could have the entitled high-rise parking on the parking lot that is not built, and then you can have the high-rise that's actually built. And all three of those stages have different assessments based on their level of like fulfillment of the ultimate, highest and best use.
And it's an important question. It's getting into the minutia at this point. So I would want to, make sure that we're getting at the right, at the right answer before it's used as a foundation for any decisions. Because the reality is that part of it, as part of the consultant team that's hired to spearhead this process, it includes an engineer whose specific job is to identify the precise amount of the assessment and what that will imply in terms of fees owed. So I'd probably want to check with someone like that before I'm too definitive on that answer. Yeah.
Thank you, Rena. Thank you, Michael.
Yep.
Are there any additional members from the DCTF that would like to Have anything else? Questions, comments?
One thing I would like to say, Adam,
Yeah.
and Jim, you might be going over this as well, but this meeting was partly intended to introduce these sorts of models. The next phase of work, at least for me and David, is going to be talking with all the major stakeholders and really kind of gauging what their initial reactions are. So this is only kind of the first step, and a general one at that. And we're going to be digging in after this with Leslie's help to speak with, what would be the major stakeholders in anything along these lines.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, if there's no additional comments, we can move on. Oh, I don't see another item.
So we have staff report.
Reports, sorry.
This is new this time.
It's not blue either. It threw me off.
Sorry. I should have made it a different color, you're right.
No, it's all right. It's fine. It's okay.
That's
So moving on
okay.
to reports from staff, but should we let WRT and Michael and David take off?
So you can let Michael and David take off. Jim's going to help me with the second item.
You're on the hook, Jim. Gotcha.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, David.
Thank
Have a
you.
great holiday.
Thanks, everyone.
We
Have a
appreciate
good
your
night.
time.
Thanks,
you,
Michael
guys.
and David.
Bye.
So I just wanted to, so the staff report is just reporting back to the DCTF on some items that we've talked about before. So the first item I have is just an update on the CEQA schedule. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. Why do I not have that option? Okay. How weird. I don't have the option to share screen.
Leslie, did
Yeah.
you move your cursor to the bottom
Yeah.
and it didn't populate?
No, I have stuff there, but I don't have the share screen button. Oh
Really?
my gosh. Oh, there it is. There it is.
okay.
There it is. There it is. There it is. So sorry. Like, oh, where'd it go? Okay. All right. Go back to that one. So this is our current CEQA schedule right now. So we're developing an environmental impact report for the downtown.
Leslie, I
section.
don't think it's shared. Does anybody else see this?
I do see it.
I see it.
Oh, I don't see it. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, Jim.
Okay, no worries. So we're going to be releasing the end of December, possibly the first week of January, the notice of preparation for the environmental impact report. So this will include the project description. It'll be the public notice that we're going to be starting this work. And then that will be followed by tentatively on January 27th, a public scoping meeting to give the public an opportunity to review that project description, ask any questions, and voice any concerns about things that they want to make sure are included. And then sometime in late summer of this year, we'll release the actual draft of the environmental impact report. So we haven't talked about the environmental impact report or CEQA for a long time, so I wanted to provide you that update as that's coming up here soon for us. And then the second item that I wanted to report out on was at the last task force meeting, there was a question about the preferred plan office space assumptions, and this came under when we were talking about the needs for City Hall and what downtown was providing, and if there'd be, you know, in our preferred plan, in our preferred plan as proposed, is there, you know, enough space for something like City Hall downtown? And so just some information for you, the office development capacity that was estimated by the model was based on land use and by block. So office uses were included, and they modeled a 90-foot to 100-foot wide floor plate, which is in line with mid-sized office projects in Santa Clara, sorry. And then finally, just one piece of information is we assumed an average square footage of 250 square feet per worker to get our number of employees that we would anticipate downtown. And that information will be also part of our environmental impact report. And then with that, Jim had a follow-up on studying the move of City Hall downtown and what that would entail and possibly cost as a future item that the task force was interested in. And Jim, I don't know if you had a couple of slides to share, I think.
Oops, sorry, I was muted. So yeah, I can share my screen. And let me just pull this up. And share. Okay, does everyone see this agenda?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, now it changed.
Can you just see the green screen with agenda?
No, it's the like the presentation view, like the
Okay.
the other view, the presenter view.
Let me try that again. How's that?
That's just the same.
That's the
I mean, we
same.
can see the agenda with the slides on the side.
Okay, that's fine. That's
and you're
fine.
just the toolbar at the top.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so city center relocation study. So Leslie asked us, based on comments and discussion from your last meeting, to go ahead and take a really quick look at what it would take to do a study of relocating the Civic Center into the downtown area. So we've been scrambling around, and these are really, sort of a very preliminary approach. And I think the idea was that if this general approach looked right and made sense, that we would then go and spend a little bit more time, developing a more detailed proposal. So this was meant as sort of an initial reality check of, is this what's needed? Is this sort of the right level of study? And are these the right, is this the right team? So we've actually spent a good deal of the time just seeking out some expertise. And we've learned some really interesting things about some other folks that have been involved with similar studies. So as everyone knows, there was sort of an initial effort done by Smith Group to look at sort of the rebuilding of Civic Center in place, but also utilizing different portions of the existing Civic Center land for other kinds of infill. And that study was not completed. Part of our due diligence is just trying to understand exactly how far this study went in terms of looking at the program for the Civic Center. And so we're still working with Leslie to put our hands on some of that data, but we do have a general sense of what's available. So that was considered in developing this approach. So the idea then would be to take that study and do the additional step of saying, okay, where could that program fit within our existing downtown plan to its benefit, right? How can we utilize that as a workplace, as a complex of employment uses that can help activate the downtown? And I think some of this, in terms of the task force thinking, was summarized in Dan's memo, and I think there's a lot of good questions asked there, and it's really gotten us thinking about, wow, how could that happen? And as we sort of run through this, there are, maybe 2 or 3 different ways that could be integrated into this plan, but each has different implications in terms of land ownership and partnerships with other landowners, you know, and the actual configuration of the uses, you know, and where are they located and which way do they face and on what public space, you know, of the 3 public spaces that we're studying. So, you know, definitely some interesting things there to study further. So the scope, the sort of the preliminary scope that Leslie asked us to look at is summarized here, and I think this was sort of an outgrowth of the task force discussions and Dan's memo. But really look at land use layout options, look at the city hall floor plans and floor plates that are specific to the different types of uses that exist in the Civic Center complex. Understand that program and then understand how it could be kind of regrouped in different ways. You know, which uses have synergies with others, which uses can be separate from others. How can you break that program up into its logical chunks, whether that's 2 chunks or 3 or more, and then how can those be accommodated in, you know, the different building masses that we have in the downtown plan. So that's sort of one side of the study, is looking at that physical configuration based on a specific program that's also based on a growth trajectory for the Civic Center needs. And then the other, maybe even more significant piece of this study is the economic analysis. How is this done? And so the economic analysis looks at the existing property and its land value, as well as the value of the property that it is located to in the downtown. And then how would this move be beneficial to the city cost-wise? What are the different ways this could be paid for or financed? Is it bonds? Is it selling the city hall property? And then what are the possibilities for PPP if other landowners are involved? Considering prevailing wage, construction costs, and reviewing examples mentioned by the DCTF and Dan's memo. And I think there's some other ones not mentioned in Dan's memo that would make good case studies, just to understand, you know, what benefits have those relocations had on those other downtowns, and what can we learn from that. So that's the basic scope. We think that all can be done within kind of a 6-month time frame. The first month is just in program confirmation. This is looking at what Smith Group did or what they didn't do, and then pulling together the detail that we need to understand the program, and then start to test fit that, you know, in these different configurations in the downtown, but also look at what future uses could go in the Civic Center site. So we'd be sort of capacity testing two different study areas. One would be to put the Civic Center in the downtown, and the other would be, okay, what could the future uses of the Civic Center site be? How do those fit, you know, with the scale of the neighborhood, what's supportable by the market, et cetera, and what effect does that have on, you know, on the value of that as a puzzle piece in this whole analysis. So doing that test fitting and then coming in and doing the financial evaluation. How could this work? What are these properties worth? What kind of mechanisms could make this happen, and what would be the benefit to the city in those different methods of financing. And then based on that evaluation, are there, you know, is there anything we would do slightly different? You know, we're going to learn something from the financial evaluation. So how does that change the concept? So there might be another month of refinement of those concepts based on the financial analysis. And then once that's done, then we would pull that together into a final report, which we think would not be a single recommended option, but it might be, here's an evaluation of 3 options or 2 options, however many make sense, and that really can be used by the city and by all of you to make decisions going forward. So it's roughly 6 months, maybe a little bit more. I don't think less, just because things always take a little more time than you think. And then probably 3 check-ins with the task force during that process, and then other coordination meetings with the city as well as with our internal team. So that's the basic process that we're thinking of. And now the team. So here's where it got really interesting for us, is we just started calling around, seeing who's done this, and who would be really knowledgeable in this area. So we found Siegel and Strain architects who we knew, but we weren't as familiar with their civic center experience. And so they've done some work of this nature. They looked at a study for the Berkeley Civic Center. They've also designed and built civic centers. One of my absolute favorites is the Portola Valley Civic Center, which is beautiful, complex. It's smaller, it's a different scale than what yours would be. But they've done sort of that range, and they've been terrific in these conversations, about asking the right questions. So we think they would be a good partner that would really bring a lot of understanding to the program of the Civic Center. And then PFAL, Project Finance Advisory. So this is a financial analysis group based in LA, but they've got a branch here in the Bay Area, and they have done a ton of civic center analysis, including actually doing a study for Santa Clara for the swim center, but also doing full sort of civic center relocation studies or rebuilding studies. They did one for Sonoma County, the Santa Rosa complex, and a number of other ones. So very convincing as a group that can come in here and really understand the mechanisms that are ideal for this particular kind of project. Along with that, would need a competent land appraiser or land valuation group, and so we made contact with Rund and Partners, and I think they're very they're sort of industry leaders and very competent and could do this very efficiently. And then for costing, we have actually 2 groups. One is Robert from our team that all of you know from CSWST2, just to understand that the infrastructure side of things, we're already in pretty good shape on the downtown portion. So this would be more about infrastructure upgrades needed for the Civic Center site for different types of development that we would look at up there. And then the vertical construction cost, TBD, that's not to be determined. That's actually the name of this costing group, kind of an odd name for a cost estimating group. But nevertheless, really competent group. They come highly recommended and really experts in vertical construction. So I think they could give us what we need for the cost, both of Civic Center in the downtown context, but also other new development in the Civic Center complex. So back of the envelope, this is where we are now until we sort of dig into this a little bit more. So it's a range, kind of hovering around 300,000. About half of that tied up, a little less than half of that tied up in the sort of the physical options and test fitting, and then a little over half tied up in the financial analysis. So that's kind of where we are. And, you know, I think, Leslie, you should maybe take it back, but I think we're just looking for some feedback. Is this, you know, going in a direction that makes sense, and should we dig into this proposal a little deeper?
And I think this was just, the task force had asked about this in the context of, you know, is this something they want to go ask the council for, you know, in the future, this work? And this, I think, would really help them in that, you know, in considering that as an option. And I don't know, task force members, if you had any other questions or comments on that. I see Deborah.
No, or do you have
Adam?
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Is this going to be able to be shared right here?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, Leslie has a copy of this. Leslie, I did make one correction on this, so I'll just send you my updated.
Okay.
It was actually just on the title slide on slide 3, so I'll send that to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Chair, did you want me to call hands?
Sure.
Or do you have something?
Oh, I guess there are hands. Sorry, I didn't see them. Sorry, Deborah, go ahead. Sorry, they were off to the right.
It's okay. So yeah.
Thanks. And sometimes people tell me that with that yellow pineapple on my bookshelf, they can't see the hand. So
It does.
That is true. And your yellow
Yeah.
flower pot.
yeah. So just for context, because I don't have it handy, Leslie, what was the original amount that the city allocated for the task force? And then I know we amended it once, and I just want to understand, you know, what proportion this new ask is going to be.
Yeah, so the original amount was $400,000. We amended that for another 100,000, and then we amended it again for another 300,000. So I believe we're at 8.
Okay, thank you.
And computer is acting.
You know, one of the things, sorry, just to say about this is why the ranges. I think there's still some unanswered questions, mostly around the level of detail of what the current programming data is that the Smith group worked with. So I think there was some questions about that. We actually haven't seen all the data yet. And so I think that's why the ranges, if it's in pretty good shape, it would be on the lower end of that range. If it's not, you know, if it needs some more work, and you know, maybe a few more interviews with different city departments or whatever, it would be on the higher end of the range.
Dan, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Anyone else? Am I it?
I see a yellow pineapple.
Okay, I gotta get one of those. So yeah, thank you, Jim and Leslie. What I wanted to find out, and I think it's included in one, I took a screenshot of it, but the added garage savings too that's going to be included in it as well. So Jim, you would take a comparison of the building that Smith Group had said, okay, we're going to pick this up and move it into a different location in the city with parking in place, and compare that versus the structure that will be placed in downtown, which I think is considerable savings. Is that something you're looking at as well?
Can you explain that a little bit more, Dan?
Sure.
It has to do with the garage.
Yeah, so if you take a look at, I think it's block B. I don't have the foil deck in front of me, I don't think. Wait a minute. Oh, I do. So on block B, we're talking about a garage, a public garage that will probably not be as active, if active at all, during business hours for City Hall, which could be utilized as a garage for City Hall. And if it is a mixed use, maybe that complex. So I think that's, there's some built-in savings there as well.
I see. You're talking about block B of the downtown plan.
Correct. And if
Gotcha.
And I know where you're thinking, you're probably thinking block F as one option. That would be a 1 block walk for City Hall members. And then also the height, due to the heights on block A and B, those could be other options for it. And the garage would be in very, very close proximity. So you wouldn't have that garage cost. So I just want to make that point.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to understand is what was striking about our analysis with these cities was the follow-on private investment that followed the public investment. Is that going to be looked at all?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So Dan, I actually went back over your memo this afternoon and reread that, and particularly the part about, what's the economic benefit of moving City Hall to the downtown?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure we fully addressed that in this. That I think that is because PFAL's role is really looking technically at the financing of this move, and that's their expertise. And so I think we may want our economist that's working on the downtown plan, Ben from EPS, maybe to play a little bit of a role here to look at that analysis. What's the economic benefit in terms of supporting the economic goals of the Civic Center? So that might be, I would say not a big piece of scope, but I think that might be useful to sort of get at this question that you're asking.
Great. And then one, again, I brought this up, and it was quite a bit. It was 25 minutes, but Luis Aragon and several other of the city managers that we talked to said they'd be more than happy to be interviewed by whoever wants to take this study, so we can put you in touch with them, on what their experience was, not only with private investment following public investment, but also their approach to mixed use and how they utilize that to save construction costs. The whole thing is, does this make sense, as far as a community benefit? And we're not advocating for this, but we want to see how much, how much is this going to save on the 310 million we saw with Smith Group, to rebuild a city hall that, in my opinion and our group's opinion, is going to need to be rebuilt in the next at least 10 years. And this, this guy and a couple of the other city managers could spread some light on that. The other point is the dormancy of those 4 blocks. So if they do remain dormant for 2 decades, let's say Prometheus stays in place, Courthouse stays in place, what's the economic hit on that? Campbell, we checked, was, half the size of Santa Clara, doing about 120 million pre-COVID. Palo Alto is over 350. And if you multiply that out by 50 years, that's 11 billion in taxable money. So that's the other question that our group has. I don't know if it's something that we can answer, But if we don't have a complete downtown, what's the economic stick on that for Santa Clara versus if those 10 blocks were completed and, you know, you got hotel taxes, you got retail taxes, et cetera, but, you know, there's a cost to that. And all of that, you know, mixed together, if you look at that and you compare it with 300 grand in analysis, I think it's something that, you know, in our opinion is a layup. You know, you have to take a look at it. I think that is it on my side. And I might pop back up with a minute, if that's okay, Mr. Thompson.
Thanks, Ken.
And Sherry, if I could just want to provide a couple of clarifications for the task force and for myself as well, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, so I just want to note that what we did on the Civic Center master plan and the buildings we developed and that council conceptually had approved that we're no longer working on, those buildings cannot just to be clear, right? They just can't be grabbed and put in the downtown, because we had, I believe it was a 2-3-story max at certain spots, which wouldn't be kind of what would work here. In addition to that, because of the layouts, we had a combination where we could combine some amenities and conference rooms and a few things that I think you're going to have to look at. But certainly it's not, I think the square footage I feel confident on, and we'll have to work with WRT to get them all the data to see what else they will need to do and the needs. And we had space breakdowns, and we'll, you know, if this is funded, we'll dig into that. I just wanted to make sure it's clear. It's not just about grabbing the building and putting it somewhere else. It would be a completely different layout. And just from a cost, just because I heard $310 million. So, and I want to make sure it's clear that that's not the cost that we had 2 years ago for a new city hall. I think what we had for a new city hall, a new civic center with surface parking was $373 million. And then if we added 1 story below grade, not a structure, we were up to $437 million. So those were our costs at the time. So I heard at $310 million. So I just wanted to correct that. And of course, those are numbers from 2 years ago that when we did the estimates, about $2,000 a square foot. Just to be clear for everybody, because, you know, when we do our costs and we say 2,000 square foot, is not just for construction costs. That includes all the design costs, it includes all the project management costs and the construction costs combined, and that adds up to that. So in case anybody goes back and check on Bay Area construction costs, and certainly city costs, because they have prevailing wage, different bonding requirements and different insurance requirements than private industry, they tend to be a little higher. So I just wanted to provide that information, because I know there's a lot of research that's probably going to happen, and wanted to give you that context on the costs and the square foot cost. It was around 2,000. I would have to go back and check. Might have been a little less at the time. Currently, we're estimating around $2,000 a square foot. But with structure parking, we never looked at a full structure. We looked at one grade below, and that was $437 million.
Okay. And what we were doing is taking a look at 4A, which I think was in the 400s, but then the benefits of leasing back, I think you had built that in. We may have misinterpreted that. So if we did, I apologize. But I thought that 400 came down because of, there I go, in Blair Witch. Hold on one sec. That you know, there was some offsetting, and you had back then, and we're talking about construction costs going up. What about acreage going up? You had that at $6 million an acre.
For what then?
For Civic Center.
It varied on the land uses. I believe we had about $6 million an acre, and I apologize, right? And obviously, I think this is what we need to look at if we're going to fund it. So
yeah.
It was about $6 million an acre if you were talking about office space. But I think the consultants at the time had a lot of concern that office space at that location wasn't going to be really too viable or desirable. So where we ended up was about residential was more likely. And we looked at different densities and different locations. Obviously, we have some park sites that can't go to residential. And then when you went to residential, then the number started probably around, 5.5 or so $million at market rate, which obviously you can't be 100% market rate here. Then we started bringing it down at 15% affordable, 25% affordable, and then it got lowered to around the $4 million range. And obviously, right, with any city property, you would be required to do surplus land process if you're going to sell it, and that could also affect the price. So a lot of variables. I apologize. I know I just wanted to correct the not
Right,
correct.
right.
I misunderstood.
I didn't mean to put you on the
I
spot.
apologize. Maybe it's not correct, but just clarify. So I'm just focused on the construction cost only of the facility and kind of the numbers we had at the time. And then the financing gets a little more complex as well, because that includes different funding sources, including the fact that the Water and Sewer Department and Silicon Valley Power Department had different funding sources than the rest of the city departments as well. So a lot of complexities associated with it. And that's, of course, something the WRT team, if you make this request and council funds, these are things that they would have to look at and validate and options. But one of my key points was that we never did look at a full structure parking alternative under our cost. So that's never evaluated. We looked at a one grade below, and that was the most expensive one. And certainly we stopped, I believe, and I apologize. So I'll have to go back and check and work with WRT. I believe it's 2 stories with certain parts of the building were 3-story max. So we never had a high-rise type facility as part of the plan, that the conceptual plan that council actually selected at the time as the preferred alternative.
Yep, agreed. And again, the last thing is and I know you guys aren't doing this, is to look beyond the building into the downtown and what it's $300,000 to study this, but how many hundreds of millions of bucks can this thing bring in if it does indeed stimulate the private development investment that we saw in these 7 cities. So, and again, everything we've done, our books are open. If you need any data, phone numbers, what have you, let us know, Jim. So, all right, thank you.
You, Dan. Rena?
Yeah, Jim, I was just curious, when you're talking about doing like a plan for costing out resale, reuse of the existing civic center facility, in addition to looking at obviously the surplus land reality of whatever that might be, I'm just wondering if because of that reality, if it's possible to also look at leasing the land, long-term lease, and it gets a little complicated, but it might provide other kind of options for how the city might finance this, or, what's the most cost-effective approach? I don't know, but it might be another alternative to look at.
And Rena, just to add to that, so when we did our analysis, and what might make sense here, and we can talk afterwards, we did look at either a long-term lease, which is about a 99-year lease, which is really what you would need to do for somebody to build, say, housing, or a sale of the property. Council, typically is more interested in long-term leases than sale. And at the time, right, and the value didn't vary that much between a 99-year lease or sale. So, but obviously that could change based on the updated analysis.
So, Manuel, do you think then that certainly a long-term lease should be explored as part of then a scenario, of looking at that?
I think so. Yeah. So if that adds cost to it, we should look into that. Like I said, that the Santa Clara does historically prefer for their properties to do long-term leases over sales. And we did look at, like I said, a 99-year lease at this location is, I think, what we looked at, which we're trying to look at the life of the buildings and what was reasonable.
Yeah, and that's definitely come up in our discussions, especially with PFAL. So I think that's an option that would want to be looked at. The Surplus Land Act definitely adds a whole new dimension to the problem solving, both in the existing civic center site, but also in the city-owned lands in the downtown. So it's really a multi-dimensional puzzle, but I think all those things would need to be looked at.
And Jim, I would say I feel confident that we did a really good analysis on the space requirements. We had multiple meetings, obviously with COVID. I don't know how that would change, if anything. So I would assume under all scenarios, just because of kind of past practice, that the higher end probably makes me feel more comfortable if there's going to be a request to council. because I think there'll be things along the way that would come up.
Okay,
part of this
okay,
process.
good to know. Thanks.
All right, I don't see any additional hands from the DCTF members. Do we need to go to,
Oh, I see a hand, Butch.
oh, Butch, sorry, Butch.
That's okay. Just real quick, two questions on this more fundamental. One, if we go down this path, is this going to delay us presenting the precise plan to City Council? And if so, how long is it going to delay it?
No, I think this would be a request in addition to, so something
So
that
this
would occur after.
Yeah. And,
After we presented the plan to the council?
well, I think, you know, what the way we would see this, and we haven't actually talked to Leslie about this, but I think the way we would see this is these could be, you know, parallel processes, both in their own time, because the downtown plan is still trying to be land use agnostic. You know, it's a form-based plan within which, you know, in theory, any land use could fit into these, you know, these different blocks. I think that could still move ahead according to its current schedule. And then this, if this civic center study happens, it can happen in its own time frame. And, you know, the two plans can certainly inform each other, but I don't think that it would affect the schedule.
Okay, that was going to be my second question, was we should be looking at this at the 30,000 foot level rather than very specific. So you answered both of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Butch. Rena?
Yeah, I just wanted to get a little specific on that, which is we're about to do the NOP, right? So the notice of preparation for the environmental impact report sets the moment in time in which we are establishing the top end of the square footages we're analyzing. We're setting a moment in time in which all the regulations, you know, the state regulations that are applicable per CEQA would be applied to the report. So we're about to do the NOP, and what's good that I'm hearing is that the amount of, you know, City Hall is also the same as office space, right? So those are one and the same. And so I don't think that, you know, as we move this track parallel, I think that it's intended for any of the results and findings of the study to be an implementation for perhaps of the precise plan. But the precise plan, you know, would leave open the opportunity, because of the square footages that are being considered with the NOP, to actually be analyzed and adopted with the specific plan's EIR. Sorry, I have a little person back here like hugging their dogs. I don't know if you can hear all that or not.
Aw.
Yeah, that's consistent with our understanding, Rena.
All right. Thank you, Butch, or Rena, you both have your hand up. I just want to make sure. Well, Rena just put it down. Okay. I don't see that we go to public comment, but do we go to public comment on it? No. Okay.
Just report back on information you'd requested.
Got it. Thank you. Are there any other questions, comments, discussion points from the DCTF members before we move on to public presentation? Okay, we'll move on to public presentation. Is there anyone that would like in the public to address the task force on items that were not on the agenda? Please raise your hand and we'll call on you for 2 minutes. Mary?
Go ahead, Mary. You should be able to unmute.
Oh, I got it.
Mute.
There
Can you hear?
go. Yes.
Okay, if you want to give me just 1 second here. First of all, I'd like to say I love your sweater, Leslie.
Oh, thank you.
One of you looked like a Viking. Can you guess who? Butch, you look like a Viking.
I thought you were going to see Butch. I like Butch's sweater too.
It doesn't look like a sweater on TV. On the phone, it looks like he's a Viking. But going on to my speech, reclaiming our downtown has been at it a little over 5 years now. We started with a dream and 5 visions, and our research showed we needed a crowd. And so for 2 years, we centered on informing Santa Clarans of the history of the downtown and gathering support. Every step we have taken since has been through research and the assistance and advice of experts in the field. Every main battle we have won has been because we learned from the best that only through research, knowledge, and the truth could we win our battles. And we have won a few. Tonight, it is important for all of you to know that our group is not advocating at all for a downtown city hall. We are merely requesting that WRT do a study of the effects of bringing City Hall back downtown, since they are the firm most knowledgeable of its possibilities. Reclaiming Our Downtown has concluded its research, and we are now happy to share the conclusions with WRT and eventually the city. We know that within 5 to 10 years, a new City Hall will be built. So now is the time to evaluate all possibilities so that the City Council can make a decision based on the best possible scenario. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Are there any other public comments or presentations on items that are not on the agenda for this evening? And I don't see any chat comments. Just
we don't have a chat anymore. It
Okay.
was disabled.
Got
in
it.
our
I'm like,
account.
you're okay. I just want to make sure I'm not missing something because I just realized it wasn't there because I was checking it before. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I just?
Yes, ma'am. Well, go for it.
Yeah, I just because my engineer brain wouldn't let this go, I went back and pulled up the slide from 2020, and our construction costs ranged at the time, 2019, between $1,500 to $1,800 a square foot, depending on what we were building. So I think the 2,000 square foot is numbers that we've been using now for other buildings based on what we've been seeing. So I just wanted to make that correction, just not remembering and then saying that number. I couldn't let it go, and I quickly went and pulled the old presentation just to clarify that note. So I apologize. I wasn't quite accurate the first time around, but those were the numbers. It was between 1,500 to 1,800 square foot. And since we have different alternatives, that's why it varied in different parking scenarios. Sorry about that. Thank you. I appreciate you letting me correct this, Chair.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime. Thank you for bringing that to attention. All right. I don't see any additional. Oh, there's one hand from attendee. Jonathan.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Hello, is the audio working?
Yes, Thank you.
Awesome. So I wanted to address some comments about the potential for putting City Hall downtown. I'm glad to hear that if there was a process in place, that it will not delay or otherwise affect the timeline for the downtown precise plan. We need to get the plan moving along as fast as possible and continue making progress. And I would be very sad to find out that this plan, was delayed because of an investigation for the City Hall. I think it's also important that before any sort of mechanism or plan is put in place, that the economic evaluation of the benefits is done. I'm concerned that this is a very expensive process. It's $300,000 that I'm not sure the city necessarily has or will be able to allocate toward this. And the economic benefits are currently unclear. And I would like to see that part studied before going on, and that the City Hall does in fact need to move, and the city does have space that it needs to grow. Since it is office space, the city could certainly evaluate downtown as one of possible locations for it to rebuild the City Hall, but it could also keep it in its current location or move it somewhere else within the city. And I think really the City Hall and the city staff and like the city, manager's office should evaluate what their needs are for office space, and then where that can be best met within the city. And certainly downtown could be one of the locations they evaluate within the boundaries of the precise plan set of rules and space. But, as the, president of the Old Quad Residents Association and speaking for many of the residents in the area, but we don't necessarily want downtown as a city hall. We want retail, we want restaurants. And unless city hall is going to have like a food hall in it, I think it's not the right use for, it may or may not be the right use for that space. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Are there any additional comments or presentations, public presentation items that are not on the agenda that have not spoken yet? Does the DCTF want to take a second round for presentations from someone who's already spoken?
I could do my presentation again. You guys want to? It's like what? It's only 8:39.
The video is on our website.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. Mary,
for any of those who would like to review it again.
Mary, can you make it really, really brief, please?
Go ahead, Mary. You can unmute yourself. Or maybe she didn't mean to raise her hand?
Didn't mean to.
Okay.
All right, we're going to close public presentation. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting of December 16th?
So moved.
No, wait, if I could, Chair, do we want to create a motion to move forward with this and ask City Council for this study to take place? Or do we have extra evaluation to do? Give Jim time. I'm not clear on that.
I think Jim was coming back with some more, right? He's already got, oh no, Jim's still here. Yeah, I would wait until Jim comes back with the findings and finalize the cost.
Okay.
Know what we would be approving, right? Or what we would be requesting. I think it's hard right now. It's still a little bit in the, out there trying to get solidified.
Understood. Okay,
I think
got
we
it.
can agendize it for another meeting to have that discussion on whether the DCTF would like to move forward going to the council with a request.
Okay.
All right, sounds good.
All right. So is there was a motion from Butch? Was there a second? I'm sorry if I missed it. Second, Dan. All in favor of adjourning tonight's DCTF meeting, December 16th, 2021, last meeting of 21. Thank you all for making it 2 years with us. Hey, I don't think anybody
3
gets
years.
I don't think anybody gets along that long.
Yeah.
But we do. All right.
Yeah.
All in
Happy
favor.
holidays, everyone.
Yeah. Happy holidays.
Yeah, happy holidays. Happy New Year.
Happy holidays. Enjoy it.
Okay.
And to the
Okay, you
community.
gotta-
in there.
We still gotta take a vote.
Thank you all.
Yeah,
You
we gotta
gotta
take a
vote.
vote. You guys keep talking. All
Yeah,
in
you gotta
favor of
vote.
adjourning the meeting, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. It carries. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to the public, and happy holidays.